Hey, everybody. I've missed you. It's your buddy Brad. Oh, this is going to be a good one. Oh, I was really thrilled when our next guest said, "Yeah, I'll do that," because I've already had a chance to meet him. He's amazing, and he's going to give us all some helpful hints, oddly enough, with storytelling. Please put your hands together. Say hi to John Livesay. John, it's so good to see you.
I hear the crowd roaring. Thank you, Brad.
Well, first, let's start. So, can you tell us a little bit about your job? I've just stalked you. I know you're the pitch whisperer, but even though I know that, I still have a lot of questions. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, you know how there's a lot of companies, especially those in tech and healthcare, that the sales teams struggle not to come in second place when they pitch against competitors, and they get so burnt out, and the sales cycles just get longer and longer. Well, as you said, Inc. magazine called me the pitch whisperer because I've written 4 books on the power of storytelling and sales, and won Salesperson of the Year at Condé Nast. So now I get called in to these tech and healthcare sales teams to be their keynote speaker at kickoff meetings and possibly do workshops, because they realize that whoever tells the best story is the one that gets the sale. And once they learn how to be black belts in stories, they usually become revenue rock stars.
Well, definitely I want to spend the bulk of this time talking about storytelling, but we need to talk about your job. Because here's my kind of view of professional speakers. Often when people come from corporate America, top sales guy at Condé Nast, they don't always transition well to being talented performers. But man, I've looked at your video. You break that mold. You are on it. And is that because of storytelling? Like, what is your secret?
I would say, it's so funny. A lot of times I'll get off stage and people go, "Wow, you're a natural." And I used to get a little frustrated thinking, you don't know how much work I've put into the story or preparation, or I like an athlete watching their videos to see what you can improve. Now I just smile and say thank you. A friend of mine is a professional photographer, and she says, "I can't tell you how many times people come up to me after they see a picture and say, 'What kind of camera do you use?' Assuming it's the camera that did it. Well, nobody asks a chef, 'What kind of oven did you use?'" So it's been, I was in high school musicals and stuff when I was a kid. And so being on stage and performing has never been anything that I shied away from and always felt comfortable doing. And then, of course, once you have an interest and a passion for something, you can continue to get training in it. And that's what I've done over the years to, it's an ongoing process like any art form.
I don't know, but I am pretty sure that most of your audiences are sales audiences. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
So they're bringing you in and saying, like, how can we use the power of intentional storytelling to sell them?
And what they love about my background is I've been in their shoes. I know what it's like to come in second place. I know what it's like to have the pressure of having a great year and how do you beat your own quota the next year. I know what it's like to get rejected. And so everything I speak about is through that lens of, it's not just some theoretical thing that maybe this works, but in fact, actual examples of it working, and then crafting something that they can actually start using once they have the awareness that they need to start using storytelling in their toolbox. It's a big change in the culture and a big change in how they go out and interact with people.
All right, so how do you do it? Well, I don't mean to be so flip, but I've got a plan with you, my friend. Okay. I still want to talk to you about, we're now on storytelling and sales, but I want to eventually broaden this out because a lot of these listeners are not in sales. So I'm convinced that you are going to talk about storytelling in life. But first, when you're talking to salespeople, what does that mean, storytelling and sales?
Well, the first concept is, first of all, I just want to invite everyone to start thinking of themselves as being in sales, even if that's not your title. I think we all have to sell ourselves all the time to get hired, to get people to work for us, to get our vision implemented, to get promoted. So if you can become a little more comfortable, if you don't want to think of yourself as a salesperson and more of a storyteller, to persuade and perform and get people to remember what you've said. Because that's the big problem is most people just say things and people forget it 20 minutes after you said it. And nobody wants to feel pushy. I totally understand that. So the traditional way of selling is to tell a case study. And even the word study sounds boring to me. So I've turned them into case stories.
Oh.
And that is, as you said, that's a new way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go through your testimonials on a website, you can go through your case studies, turn them into case stories. And the goal here, Brad, is that people see themselves in those stories because you have a customized story for each different kind of customer. And then they want to go on the journey with you because you're seen as the Sherpa, helping them climb Mount Everest, or Yoda in Star Wars. So if you think about, one of my clients is a medical tech company, and they said, we have this equipment to make surgeries go 30% faster. And we're telling that stat to a doctor and not really understanding why we're not selling more. It's so logical. And I said, well, there's the first problem.
Right.
People buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. So I asked them some questions, and we crafted this story that, imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was 6 months ago at Long Beach Memorial using our equipment when he could go out to the patient's family an hour earlier than expected.
Mm.
If you've ever waited for somebody you love to come out of surgery, you know every minute feels like an hour. The doctor comes out and says, good news, the scope shows they don't have cancer, they're going to be fine. And then turns to the rep and says, this is why I became a doctor, for moments like this. So now that rep tells that case story to another doctor at another hospital who sees himself in it and says, you know what? That's why I became a doctor too. I want your equipment.
Right.
The client said,
I'll take a dozen.
Yeah, we did. Not only are we not telling stories, it never occurred to us to make a patient's family a character in that story. So there's 4 parts to that, and we can go into that breakdown if you'd like. But it is something that anyone can learn to do.
Yeah, I definitely want to go into those 4 parts, and maybe a fifth. The fifth one is imagine yourself in a situation. And my thought is, does that story have to be true? Like, you didn't have to be a witness of that doctor telling them ahead of time the equipment worked and their patient's happy.
Yeah, the more authentic the story, the better it is, because that goes to the premise that has been around forever. Oh, in order to get somebody to buy from you or hire you, they got to know, like, and trust you.
Mm.
And the problem with that belief is that it causes a behavior that, oh, you don't know enough about me. Let me send you one more fact. Let me push out some more data about me or the product. You just don't know enough yet.
Sure.
I flip the script on that and I say, let's start with the gut. In fact, the handshake came about to show that you didn't have a weapon in your hand. So we have to build trust. Trust can be transferable with a warm introduction, eye contact. Fight or flight response has to be turned off for us to even listen. And then it moves from the gut to the heart. And the unspoken question here is, do I like you? And Tim Sanders wrote a great book about the likability factor, where he talks about doctors spend more time with patients they like, teachers spend more time with students they like. So how do we as business people up our likability factor? Well, it turns out empathy is the key. The better you describe someone's problem and they feel like you understand them, the more they think you have their solution. So gut, heart, and then head. And it's still not the time to push out info. The unspoken question, Brad, that everybody has is, will this work for me? They might trust you and even like you, but if they don't feel it's going to work for them, they're not going to buy it. And that's where storytelling really comes to the rescue. Because when you've told a story that someone sees themselves in, they go, oh, this could work for me. I relate to the person that you're talking about in the story.
It's so funny. Everything you said, as soon as it comes out of your mouth, I go like, oh, common sense. But like, articulating that is not common sense. You've put language on something that happens every single day in a way that helps us be better.
Right. So if we go back to what makes that story there's 3 C's in a great story. Is it clear? Is it concise? And is it compelling? If it's not clear and you confuse people, we know the confused mind says no, and they're never going to tell you they're confused.
Right.
Why does it need to be concise? Because you want it to be short enough that people can remember it and repeat it. Because when that happens, they become your brand ambassadors and start telling other people, or maybe they're interviewing you and 2 other people, and then you need them to remember your story to other people who weren't hearing all the pitches. And then finally, compelling. It has to make us feel something. If the stakes aren't high in the story, we don't care. We have to tug at heartstrings to get people to want to have that emotional engagement with us. So the first part of that is the exposition. You think of yourself as a journalist. Who, what, where, when, paint that picture, pull us in. Was this 6 months ago, 6 years ago? What's the person's name? Where are we? And then you describe the problem. That's the second step. The third problem is the solution. And then the magic to every great story is the resolution. What is life like for that person afterwards? And if you look at that case story I told you about the doctor, we know the doctor's name, what hospital. The problem is the patient's family, tortured. Every minute feels like an hour. You see how I pulled you in by saying if you've ever had to wait, and even if you haven't, you could probably imagine how painful that would be.
Yeah.
And then the solution is good news. The scope shows they're okay. And then the real secret is, this is why I became a doctor. And that resolution in that story is what makes other doctors see themselves in it and then want to.
Wait, walk me back just one sentence. Why is that phrase, that's why I became a doctor, so crucial?
Well, because if the story just ended with, and the doctor came out and said, good news, the scope shows the hip don't have cancer. That's like imagining the Wizard of Oz ending when Dorothy got in the balloon to go back to Kansas, the end. But no, there's a resolution in the Wizard of Oz that makes it a classic, where we see her in the bedroom going, oh my God, there's no place like home. And you were there and I appreciate everybody so much. And so that line that the doctor says after he's provided the solution, in this case, sharing good news, is a bigger personal experience of this is why I became a doctor.
Yeah.
And that taps
really
into everybody's why. And by showing it in the story, that also makes people connect to that more. It reminds them of their why.
Wow, that was a bombshell. There was a lot in there. Let me ask you about, you said something that we just flew past, and I'm going to go back to it. You said, I think you have a collection of stories that you're going to draw from, like a toolbox, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you a story about me.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you how I'm going to solve this in the future.
Okay.
McDonald's called me. That was nice. And they said, we're thinking about booking you. That was nice. And I told them a very true, heartfelt story about how when I was a kid, McDonald's was a really big treat. And on the luckiest day, Mom would pull the Gold Station wagon into McDonald's. And I mean, it was thrilling. So still, I have that feeling about McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Maybe not as much as I implied. The reason that was, and by the way, I got booked. That worked, right? That's John Livesay. But if I'm talking to a company for whom I do not have that personal connection, it's not as obvious to me. And I suspect many people are listening going like, yeah, I'm selling copy paper or whatever. I sort of get it because you talked about selling medical supplies. Can you address me selling to someone I don't really know or connect to?
Well, if you think of your brain like a jukebox, we know you used to push a letter and a number and a song would come out, or younger people. Yes, think of playlists and they have different songs. So instead of a different song coming out, you have a different story coming out. So the first part of that question is, if you're selling real estate, for example, there's basically, three kinds of buyers. There's the young married couple, first house. There's the couple that's getting divorced, and there's the retired couple that's downsizing and needs a smaller place. Well, you need a story of someone you've helped in that category stage of life. You don't tell the retired couple about, let me tell you about this young married couple I just helped buy a house. They won't see themselves in that story. So that's what I mean about having different stories, the right story at the right time. So when you're approached by someone, a new company, you don't know anything about them, obviously, if there's any time between when the inquiry comes in and you having the conversation, you can do some research.
Right.
That's very helpful. And start looking at what the company's values are. What is their mission statement? Do they do any nonprofit work? Are they celebrating sustainability or diversity? Or is there something going on, on their about page, the history of the company, that you could comment on and be authentic on that interest?
Well, also you said something kind of brilliant in there. Of so many things that were brilliant, John. But the story is, how I helped somebody in that situation rather than my connection to this particular house that we're buying and selling or
Hmm.
this industry. Ah, clever. All right, so let's imagine somebody's listening to this going, well, that's great, but I don't really sell that way. But I like stories. How do we
Mm.
broaden out your wisdom to help the rest of the world?
Well, the good news is that once you learn the basics of storytelling, that those four parts I'd mentioned, exposition, problem, solution, resolution. I had a orthopedic surgeon I was working with. He had wanted my help on telling the story of a new product he created. And then he was putting his 7-year-old to bed. And she said, Daddy, tell me a story. And he goes, okay, I'll read you Good Night Moon. She goes, no, don't read me a story. Tell me one.
Mm,
And I panicked for a minute. And then I remembered you'd taught me how to tell a story and that I should make it about a girl that's like my daughter's age. So she'll see herself in it. And so he started off telling the story and he became a hero to his little girl that night. So that's how storytelling can impact you on a personal level because stories are what bond us. It's literally in our DNA. And if you have your own story of origin of how did you become a lawyer, an architect, a doctor, or whatever it is, a salesperson, how did you become, in my case, a keynote speaker, and you have those story of origins ready to go to build rapport with someone, that's much more interesting than just talking about sports or the weather. And
yeah,
then you can ask them what their story of origin is. And, it's like a little kid asking their parents, tell me the story of how you and mom met,
right.
right? So those story of origins are a great way to help you in any situation get rapport with people, especially at a big event or you don't know a lot of people in the room. Ask them that story. Or if you're meeting a couple, almost everybody has a great story of origin of how they met. And it brings up happy memories for the most part
Right.
because beginning, most marriages are happy.
Almost all of them. All right. So I was thinking, as I was preparing for this, John, I was thinking of you. Um, my kids are in their 20s and they're all some form of introvert and some form of shy.
Uh-huh.
And so we talk a lot about, it's like, conversation skills and dealing with people skills. And I remember talking to them ages ago because parties can be sometimes the most terrifying thing to do is walk in that door and see a room full of people that are all already in their little conversation,
Right.
little circles, and you're like, oh, what to do? And then how are we going to break in? And my advice frequently has been just tell them stories like, there's that thing that just happened last month that you still can't believe. We all have those things at the grocery store. You'll never
Yeah.
believe the barista when she turned to me and said this. We can memorize those and then put them in our little jukebox.
Yeah.
Just wanted you to know I was paying attention.
You were.
And the stories help us socially because of those things you mentioned: trust and connection,
Yes.
empathy.
Well, I tell people that your soft skills, which I define as storytelling, listening, and empathy, make you strong. And your brain goes, wait a minute, how can something soft make me strong?
Mm,
So if everyone has hard skills, I went to school to become a doctor, a lawyer, architect, whatever. But you're the one that has the soft skills. You're a better listener. You have the ability to express some empathy. Maybe you have a story ready to go. That is what's going to make people want to keep talking with you because whoever tells the best stories not only typically is memorable, but also magnetic.
yeah, yeah. It just takes the pressure off.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. What were the three things? Storytelling, empathy, soft skills defined as.
Storytelling, listening, and empathy. Those three things.
And I missed that one.
It's okay.
Let's
So
edit that out, John.
those three things together make the emotional connection. So think of it like a three-legged stool, right?
Right.
One's a little weaker than the other. It's not as stable as it could be. So if you just say, okay, this month I'm going to work on my listening skills. Next month will be about empathy. Next month will be
Right.
about storytelling. And then after 3 months, you've got some real practice in on each one of those things. Don't try to do all three at once. Just pick a month and say, this is my storytelling month. And I'm going to work on having at least 2 or 3 stories of how I got into this business or someone I've helped. and then go on to the, what can I do to become a better listener?
Well, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It seems like I'm not sure. It seems like 20 years ago we didn't hear about storytelling and business being related, and now it seems like a more accepted. Like, oh yeah, totally related. Are you kind of on the front end of that curve? Seems like you are.
Well, certainly 10 years ago, when I had this concept, people were like, I don't understand. How does storytelling help me close more sales? And then I would tell a story of somebody using it versus somebody who didn't, and say, would you like to hear the story of what they said that caused them to win $1 billion airport renovation against the competitors? Yes, please. And then they start going, I remember working with an executive search firm, and they said, we have a similar model where we go in and between us and two competitors, and we always ask if we can go last. And I go, well, that's not a very good strategy, hoping you get to go last, because you can't control that. But what you can control is telling a story. And then I saw a light bulb go off in the CEO's head. Oh, so if we go first and we're the ones that told the best story, we set the bar. We don't have to worry about not being memorable just because we weren't last.
Right.
So those awarenesses now are much more in the marketplace. And, it's a combination of, people used to think, well, the only thing that you need a story for is your brand. Brands have commercials, they tell stories in commercials, and that's my background is advertising. But I'm the one that has sort of really pushed it into the world of sales and saying it's your storytelling skills, your soft skills of that will make you successful and not be seen as a commodity.
When people hear you and then fail, where are they missing it? Are they not believing you, or like?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't promise that this is going to suddenly make you 100 out of 100.
What?
But it will. Even baseball players don't get a home run every time, but it will increase your closing ratio. Let's say you're closing 2 out of 10 qualified prospects and you start telling stories, you can get that to 3 to 4. I had one client said, we won 3 new business pitches in a row doing this. So the mistakes I see people making is thinking that they're the hero of their own story. And you're not. Remember, you're the Sherpa or you're Yoda. So the hero of the story is your client. And that client has to be somebody that their potential client identifies with. And then the other mistakes are, it's not clear, it's not concise, it just rambles on, and there's no compelling drama, there's no feeling attached to it. So if you apply those 3 C's and practice your story and say to somebody, did I confuse you with all those acronyms?
Right.
Do you think you could remember that story, or could I cut something out? And did you feel anything? That will help you fine tune your storytelling skills.
Well, it's funny because the way you defined success and failure right there is the same way as I would define success and failure as somebody who's on stage. Right? The people who tell stories that stink, they're often bragging. And then I stepped on the top of Mount Everest and people applauded. Right? We don't like that guy. We don't like people who are too heroic.
A little vulnerable is what people can relate to. And oftentimes I'll work with groups and I'll say, how many of you here see yourself as a perfectionist? A lot of A-type personalities in the room. And I, used to be like that. And, we can get 10 raves and 1 negative review, and we just focus on that like it's a, stone in our shoe. So I came up with a new way of looking at things, and I said, let's just let go of being a perfectionist. And it's not enough to tell people don't think of yourself like that until you give them something else to replace it with. So I've come up with the term progressionist, and it means that you're someone who celebrates progress. We're wired to celebrate progress. It's in our, that's why Fitbit works. You've done this many steps compared to yesterday, or video games, you've hit the new level.
Right.
So I have teams now opening up their meetings every week we're going around the room and celebrating progress. It doesn't have to be a sale, but we've got we've made some progress, as opposed to starting off with problems or mistakes, or just a bunch of numbers. 5, give us a short thing of what progress have you made since we had the meeting last week. And it makes people's brains search for that and celebrate it. And the more you celebrate it, Like literally, if you're climbing up a mountain and you're halfway there, you have a choice. You can look down and go, oh, look how far I've come up, halfway there. Or you can look up and go, oh, look how much further I have to go to get to the goal. And what do you think is more motivating? It's celebrating the progress.
Yeah, unless there's a keg on top. Then you're like,
Mhm.
I only have halfway to get to that keg. I'm gonna take a little detour and
Okay.
ask you about authenticity, because you brought that up earlier.
Hmm.
We see in comedy,
Hmm.
and I just saw a one woman show in New York City last week, the trend towards being ridiculously vulnerable. So like
Mm.
John Mulaney just put out a big
Yes.
Netflix special, and he could not be more vulnerable, talking about some tragic
Rehab.
bad decisions and drug and rehab. And
Mhm.
as a guy who thinks about storytelling all the time, what how does that feel to you, this trend towards, you can't be Zig Ziglar up there and just talk. You got to be John Livesay.
Well, I talk about what it felt like to get laid off after 15 years. It felt like a kick to the gut. I realized I felt like I'd lost my identity a little bit. And
Mm,
when I talk about that, people go, oh, God, that really resonated with me because I had those
right,
same fears. Um, I talk about what it felt like to get divorced. And I didn't used to talk about that, but I talk about painting over your masterpieces and having to redo proposals and
right.
sometimes redo your story. And that wasn't the story I thought my life was going to take, and I had to paint over that initial story of what I thought was going to happen. And so I think that when you show that you have had some, the pandemic obviously made me feel vulnerable when I couldn't go
Yeah.
to live events, and having those, that's what pulls us in to each other, and that's what makes us feel like, oh, you're not successful because you've never had any challenges. You're successful in spite of them. And maybe you have some insights into how to be more resilient and based on your experiences. So those stories of vulnerability and authenticity are crucial. And I really feel that the stories that have happened to you are the most powerful ones.
Yeah, hallelujah. We're we're drinking the same Kool-Aid. I think it goes back to trust too. I
Mm.
mean, they don't trust us if we're too good. And everyone likes that story about, and that, I was in Kroger and I dropped the jelly jar and I was so embarrassed because it spilled everywhere. Because
Right.
we've all done that. That's what really works.
Yes.
I was at that important party for my spouse's boss, and I spilled red wine over my white shirt. That's what they love. They love that more than, and that's when I turned to my client and I said the most brilliant thing ever. I don't think they love that as much.
Correct. They can't relate to it. That's why if you're listening to a professional athlete talk about how they got, the Olympics or whatever it is, unless they have, given you some insights into the struggles they had to even make the Olympics. Um, I like Michael Phelps' story of, he had several races in 1 or 2 days, and, he came in second or third sometimes. And most people forget that. But he had to be able to figure out how to be resilient and let go of second place in one event. He had an hour, maybe, or even less sometimes, before he had to go do the next race.
Yeah.
And he would then go and win a gold for that one. But how fast we let go of stuff is really relevant. And so if he told that story, then we start going, oh, so when I get a no or a rejection or don't get hired for something I worked really hard on, or don't get the sale, how do I get myself back up? I created something I call the 5-5-5 method for that, which is you think of yourself like the movie director of your life and you zoom out and you say, will this matter in 5 minutes,
Mm,
5 hours, or 5 days from now? And, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, some people lose their mind over that. And I'm like, if you're still worried about that 5 days from now,
yeah.
you've got a problem. Um, but this ability, especially in a group situation where you're like, listen, okay, we're going to complain and all kinds of stuff, but only for the next 5 hours. And then we're never going to bring it up again. So get it out of your system and then let it, because the faster we get back up, the more present we are
Yeah.
for the next opportunity. But if you're still thinking about something somebody said or did from the past, it can be devastated. Now, an example of that in my personal life is when my dad died 10 years ago. I wish I had this tool then because I could go back to my younger self and say, yeah, 5 days from now, you're still going to miss your dad. But let's zoom out again. How about 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years from now? Okay, 5 years from now, you're still going to miss him, but I promise you, you won't be this sad.
Uh,
So that's how storytelling and the stories we tell ourselves can help us become more resilient, which is really what we've all experienced with the pandemic. And, just it seems like there's always something else to worry about.
yeah, you think? I opened the New York Times this morning because I'm a news junkie, and John, I just couldn't do it. There's not a lot of good stories in there. Right now, it's not a lot of happiness in those papers. All right, I have taken a lot of your time up, but there's no way I'm going to let you go until I ask you a couple of questions.
Yes.
My expertise when I'm in front of audiences is talking about social and emotional support, and that's mentoring and encouraging and making sure we take advantage of that, but also deliver it to others. If I ask you, who is that person for you? Do you have somebody who really told you, I think, John, you're special. I think you got something. Does someone come to mind?
Yes, a former boss of mine, Alice Alston, when I wrote my first book about 17 years ago, and I told her, listen, I've only worked on the book on weekends and nights, because back then the concept of doing something on the side was not exactly welcomed in corporate America. And she said, how wonderful. We'll throw a book party for you in LA and at my place in New York. And just was so supportive. And that's actually what's launched my speaking career is I would talk to a car company like Land Rover or Jaguar and say, if you run your ad in this magazine, it reaches affluent people. And then the magazine's going to buy copies of my book. And I'm going to give talks to your team on how to sell to the luxury market and not take rejection personally. So that was an example of somebody who really believed in me and made a big difference in my life. And we're still friends to this day.
Aw. Well, I got to ask, I know you're friends. Does Alice know how important she was to you?
I think so. Yeah. In fact, ironically, she was living in New York and I was in LA when that happened. And now we both live in Austin. So we get to see each other pretty often.
All right. Well, tell Alice I said yo and tell her I said aw.
Okay, I will.
Every single guest has answered the following question. And now it's your turn.
Okay.
So we have John Livesay, the pitch whisperer, expert in storytelling as it relates to sales, keynote speaker, rock star, super nice guy. What gives you hope?
My 9-year-old godson, Max. I was visiting him and his family a couple weeks ago, and we were at dinner, and I was talking about my mom who recently passed away, and my eyes filled up with tears, and he got up unprompted and came and gave me a hug.
Oh.
And I thought, well, at 9 years old, he's got empathy and compassion. Very sweet. That gives me hope.
That gives me hope. You still feel that, my friend, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I got a great picture. His mom took a picture of him hugging me. It was very sweet.
Yeah. That's priceless, that picture.
Yeah.
Well, I love this. What's his kid's name?
Max.
I have two emotions in my head right now. One of them is this profound love for Max, and I'm with you, hope. Also, it makes me worry a little bit because that kid is exactly where he should be, but as he ages, there are going to be people who try to squeeze that sensitivity out of him. And I just want to cheer for him and say, don't lose it, Max, because it's going to be hard, right?
Yeah. Well, luckily he's got parents that love him, and he knows I love him. And hopefully, if you're surrounded with enough people who encourage you to express those kind of emotions, that you can tune out the people who might try to discourage it.
Yes. Go, Max. Oh, that is sweet. How do people find you, John Livesay?
My website is my name. My book is called The Sale is in the Tail. If you like to listen to it, I narrated it. It's a business fable. And if you can't remember any of that, just Google The Pitch Whisperer and all my content will show up.
The Pitch Whisperer. Good enough. Well, dude, thank you for saying yes. I was really looking forward to this interview, and you do not disappoint, my friend.
Thanks for great questions.
Thanks, everybody. John, hang on with me. Everybody, I'll see you next time. Be good to each other. Tell more stories. Thanks.